any love for your grandmothers, you will love this movie. Seriously.
Who doesn't love grandmas?
Yeah, this movie.
Grandmas are awesome.
Yeah.
This could be like, this movie could be subtitles like, could like the surtitle or something could be like, "Yay, Grandma" or something. There's at least like 4 major scenes in the film that like Grandma saves the day, and you're like, yeah, go Granny.
Grandma is badass.
All adults watching this film for the first time in Brina's place, and like when Grandma saves the day, we're all like, yeah, like getting up, like hilarious. We're just getting into
like
it.
football.
Like, yeah, and the grandmother's played by in the dub. She's played by Pam Doherty, who is amazing.
She's so good.
And there is a particular scene in that as well, where she gives a monologue, which is gorgeously written, and where she just talks about family and how important it is. And it is it's absolute poetry.
She's a really good example of, I mean, people always ask, you know, like, how do you become a voice actor? How do you become a voice actor? But the thing is, you really have to be an actor first. You can't just, you know, make cool voices. You really have to come from a genuine place and be able to really act. And Pam Doherty is such a good example of that, because I've seen her on stage before, and she is mind-blowing on stage. She is an incredible, incredible actress, and I really look up to her a lot. So she's such a good example of, like, the type of actor you should strive to be.
It's really all just so. Mike McFarlane, the ADR director, when he sometimes from time to time, I'm in the marketing department, I'll go over to the studio and I'll kind of, you know, sit in the back and just listen and see what's going on, kind of see the magic happen. And when I first heard Grandma Sakai, and it was the monologue that I did get to hear in the playback, I cried, like my makeup smeared, like I went back to my office, and I'm like, oh my gosh, did someone hurt you? Are you having a good day? And I was like, no, I'm just so verklempt. And it just at one point, like, it made me so happy, so glad, and just wanted to love everyone. And that monologue you speak of is, people can use that for auditions. Like, if you need a good monologue, you just need to sell it. It's just one of those great, it's beautiful. I mean, I could go on for days and days, and this is, Summer Wars. Granny's badass.
Badass grandma is nice.
Grandma.
Yes.
The whales are really confusing and overwhelming, I guess. And they do nothing, and then they do something. Can you comment on the whales at all? Like,
that's a yes.
They're named John and Yoko, and they're the guardians of Oz. And they're they are kind of figures in the movie that you don't totally know what they do.
I just expecting them to do something, and I know they did stuff, but like, it seems.
They do like a wardrobe upgrade. They're like, let's pimp your threads.
Yeah.
Who's controlling the whales? Like, are they?
I think that they're AIs, aren't they?
Yeah, they are a part of.
From what I understand, the John and Yoko and all of the Oz-only characters, they live within Oz, which I imagine to be a mainframe somewhere. Like, they're a visual representation of a whole lot of ones and zeros. And they're almost like the friendly admins that just swim about, mascot characters, you know, goodwill, you know, the Mickey Mouse you see at Disneyland that you can go hug. But John and Yoko can give you really awesome outfits too. You know, Mickey can't do that.
Well, and if it helps at all, like the names John and Yoko, of course, it's John Lennon and Yoko Kanno, or Yoko Ono, sorry, not Yoko Kanno.
Wow.
The Yoko that's not nearly as talented as Yoko Kanno. But you know, Oz in sort of the story, it's never really talked about, but you can kind of intuit it. Oz is kind of an online version of John Lennon's, you know, vision of, you know, this imaginary space where people could go and be whoever they wanted to be and be in perfect harmony with themselves. And that's what Oz is supposed to be. And that's ultimately the sort of virtual utopia that it comes to represent. And so they're kind of just avatars that are just there as symbols. And yeah, they're kind of free-floating, you know, AIs that kind of you don't really take seriously until that critical moment when they actually do something. And you're like, oh, and it's kind of cool that they're kind of there. They're almost like, I don't know, they're like really, really badass firewalls. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's kind of what I imagine them to be. It's just some sort of firewall. Kind of.
Yeah, and just the fact that their names are John and Yoko is kind of a tribute to John Lennon's vision and you know, with Imagine and all that good stuff. So it's a good question, but yeah.
Does that
it's
help
kind of,
at all?
It's kind of you're kind of meant to sort of, I think, make up your own mind about what they represent, because I think they're supposed to be kind of a mystery.
Well, just there's this giant Aztec god waging war, and then let's still floating around.
Well, but if they're the firewall, he broke down the firewalls, so they can't do anything.
Yeah, they're helpless.
That's why I think that
they're helpless. Because the technology is only as good as the people using it, and that's what ultimately saves the day, is people, not the technology.
They wouldn't even have any teeth. They would just have any
Yeah, they could just sing it. It's like straining. And they couldn't fight it. They couldn't fight it because that would go against their nature. Whales are very peaceful creatures. They would just sing it.
They're pretty fashionistas too, like.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're party. They're very party.
Yeah.
I'm glad you bring up the whales, because that is kind of cool. I personally really like that, because the first time I saw it, I'm like, what? And then like the second time, I'm like, okay, actually that's really cool. But yeah, it's one of those weird little things that just they throw in there.
You.
I know when translating from Japanese to English in movies, sometimes the meaning of Japanese is too big or too small for American words for the span of time you have. Were there any parts that were very difficult and you just couldn't quite get it?
I think someone's told me the numbers before. I think generally when you translate, it takes like 30% longer to say something in Japanese on average than it does in English, so there is usually that. I've worked on things before where they just wanted to translate, they didn't want to adapt it at all, and everything came up really short. It was awkward. Luckily, such was not the case with Summer Wars. What I like about adapting scripts is that challenge of, you have to say this, you have to add some stuff, you have to make it culturally relevant to your target audience, and if it's this heartfelt moment, it still has to be heartfelt, even if the flap on screen is like, waka waka waka, wah, wah, waka waka waka. Like it looks like a squirrel running across the street, stopping, running.
Schizophrenic gopher.
It still has to work. You can't like put a thing on the screen and be like, apologies, this moment is supposed to be really sincere and sweet, but look at this flap, for reals, folks. That's the challenge I like. It's like working on, it's like working on a model kit or putting together like a watch, and I'm not very agile with things like that. I couldn't do that in real life, but I look at this as like the word equivalent of doing that. There are some lines that you get to and you look at it a couple times, and I would mark it and go on, because I knew that for whatever reason right then it wasn't happening. And generally when I do that in a script, mark it, I'm giving up for now, and then come back to it later. I'm like, oh, bing bing. If you spend too long on one particular line, you get sort of bogged down in it. So, but there were, I don't remember any specific spots, but there were spots where like, okay, I have to say this thing, but here's what the flap is. It'll often be things where in Japanese there's like one flap for it or one syllable, and in English it's a longer concept. There's a time when Kenji is talking to Granny, and Granny's like, oh, I'm so sorry, she's such a silly goose, and he just says the one flap, and so I think we put into like it's fine, like apostrophe TS-FINE, because there wasn't even time for it. It's fine, it's fine, and it sort of matched his guarded attitude at that moment too. But that's what makes it fun, the fact that it is so difficult to do. And then luckily you get times when the monologue they were talking about was all off screen, so there was time to have the pauses, and I could really just worry about the text and the emotion, not worry about the flap. Sometimes life throws you those easy moments. But it's a lot of fun. It's so much fun. I love doing it.
How about you in the front here?
What studio animated this? Because it seems very Miyazaki-esque almost in its epicness, but not, along those lines, but it's like completely different.
But it's
Hosoda is actually Miyazaki's protege. He learned from Miyazaki.
Summer Wars was animated and produced by Madhouse.